People who saw someone get fired on day one of a new job, what did that person do to get fired? Story 1. School bus driver. First day on job after a month of training, she was seen talking on her cell phone while driving a bus full of kids. Story 2. Dude interviewed well, showed up on his first Monday at the office. Drunk as fuck. Slurring, stumbling, trying to use the coffee machine and just spewing coffee all over the floor. Security walked him out within the first hour. Story 3 showed up in pajamas, and when walked to the circulation desk, wrinkled her nose and said she thought she wouldn't have to actually talk to people. The position was titled Circulation and Customer Service. Story 4. New guy was hired as a courier driver. Came in for his first day and was handed some paperwork to deliver to the nearest city about 20 minutes away. He says, "I don't drive in the city." That was literally the job, so he was quickly dismissed. Story 5. Refused to wear proper PPE. The supervisor told him to put it on. He flat out said no, so they fired him. Didn't even make it to first coffee break. If a guy is that adamant about safety gear on his first day, it isn't a good sign. Story 6. Guy came back from lunch high out of his mind. And then we found his Instagram video shouting out the company and tagging us while he was smoking out of 3 different devices in his car at the gas station a block away within minutes, because it popped up in our social media manager's feed. Story 7. Boss hired a new woman for help around the office. Her first day, she showed up on time and jumped right into helping out. Seemed like a good hire at first. Then the police showed up and arrested her for putting her 2-year-old in a home-built cage at home that morning and left the kid alone because she didn't want to pay for daycare. Edit. Wow, this really blew up. About the daycare thing, apparently that incident wasn't the first time she had done it. I'm sure she couldn't afford daycare, but don't lock your kid up in a cage and leave. Not related to my previous post, but similar, and this happened not too far from where my post took place. Story 8. Dude I started with during an overnight locked-in stocking position at Toys R Us went absolutely fucking mental. He worked about 1/4 of the shift, then started talking complete madness, then disappeared entirely. As in, we couldn't find him anywhere. We'd see evidence he was still in the store, but didn't see or hear him at all. After a couple hours of this, he would suddenly leap into whatever aisle we were in and just start shrieking, or laughing manically, or literally throwing merchandise at us. Bizarrely, he tried to show up the next day as if he were unaware of what went down. The lead guy said that happened a lot. Dudes just couldn't handle being locked in a silent, empty store all night. Why'd you think we were hiring 3 guys at once for a 6-man crew? Story 9. He got put on inventory unloading with me, and we were getting all sorts of musical equipment in. He started taking all of the drumsticks that we were getting in and sharpening points on them with his knife, and then trying to see if he could get one to stick into the wall. It was one of those giant pole barn type warehouses with some sort of plastic-lined paper insulation. Eventually, someone saw him and walked him out. Story 10. We were in a rut and desperately needed people. So my boss told me to lower my standards. Commercial driving job, and I had disqualified like 4 candidates, all warranted MO. I said, fine, I'll try. And he sends me a student from our driving school. First 3 days are classroom, last 2 days are for driving. This man shows up, late. No uniform. We bought him one. I ask him where his uniform is. Left it at home. I say, okay, you can have someone bring it on lunch. Let me see your driver's license. He says he also left that at home. I say, how do you show up to be a driver on your first day late without your uniform and license? He says, sorry, he overslept. I fired him on the spot. He cussed me out and walked away. My boss started to scold me until I told him what happened. He stopped LOL. Story 11. Trained a guy at a large liquor store. I was a department manager. Nice guy, worked hard, seemed engaged, sent him home a little early since he was training, tried to sneak out a handle of vodka on his way out the door, got stopped by security. My only reaction was, really, dude? Story 12. He kind of fired himself. Hired as the president of a live entertainment company. The owner threw a big welcome meeting in the enormous lobby. Breakfast served and the whole 9 yards. Literally $1 million salary. Easy. Dude never showed. Was a running joke for years. Story 13, not day 1, day 5. I hired a woman who interviewed very well. Her job was admin, taking calls and scheduling appointments, creating a schedule for 17 salespeople. Not very intense. She was in training. 2 different people would be training her, alternating days. Day 1, all was fine. Day 2, just the normal feedback on how fast she was picking things up. Day 3, feedback was that the trainer thinks the new person was fondling herself at her desk. She questioned what she saw, but wanted it noted. Day 4, feedback from the other trainer mimicked what the first had seen, but was adamant it happened, and the new person was wearing a skirt every day, and touching the desk and the phones and the logbook and the pens and the doorknobs. Day 5. Lunchtime. New person went to lunch. Both trainers got someone else to answer the phones while they came to me to report that, indeed, the new girl was pleasuring herself at her desk on company time. And WTF is up with that, and why can't she do this at home? And they looked it up, and it can be an obsession for some people, and they do not want to work with her anymore. So when the new person returned from lunch, I caught her as she got back into the building and said, "Can you please come into my office? I need to discuss something with you." HR was already in my office. New woman said, "I know what this is about. I'll just quit." She left. We mailed her check to her, sanitized the office, got a new chair for that desk, and never heard from her again. Story 14, guy was hired contingent on background credit check. On day 3, I got a call from HR saying he wasn't eligible. The store manager who hired him made me fire him. Took him in the office and said, "Your checks came back negative and you can't work here." He started going on about his record had been sealed and the forgery and theft convictions were supposed to be expunged, and then I said, "No man, you got bad credit." Fast forward 3 months. The company dropped the credit check requirement, so the store manager hired him again. 3 weeks later, they caught him stealing computers. Story 15. New hire's first day as an usher at a movie theater. I was training them and he just vanished. Showed again a few hours later. Turns out he went and watched a whole movie from beginning to end. We were slow and you said there wasn't much more to train on, and you said we can watch stuff on shift, was the excuse. He severely misunderstood my "when it's slow, you have some free time" comments. Like, man, there's more to cover and we don't just watch a whole movie. If there isn't much to do and the right folks are on shift, you can watch a few minutes here and there. As an usher, it's assumed if you're not seen, you're off doing your job somewhere. And we're on radio if needed. Story 16. Was an unpaid intern at my mom's campsite for the summer just to get something to do. Mom hires a new guy for a trial period, and as I know practically how everything works, I'm told to shadow him for a few days. Keep in mind this is a small campsite, and a family business first and foremost. Conversation starts up, and immediately new guy zeroes in on a worker just doing his job, and starts trash-talking him like crazy, while the worker was only doing his job of trimming the hedges, emptying the trash, that sort of stuff. They hadn't even been introduced yet. End of the day, I report to my mom. New guy in tow. Snitch that I am, I tell every unsavory detail that spewed from the little rat's mouth. The worker he trash-talked all day long for no reason. My dad, Mom's husband. Mom told him his trial period was over, and to get out of her property and never show his face here again. Story 17. I started on the same day as another woman. At one point, I started cracking a few bad dad jokes to break the ice a bit. She then said, "Oh, I've got one," and then proceeding to reel off some of the most racist jokes I've ever heard. She went to lunch and never came back. Story 18. Technically, it was the second day. I work in a steel foundry, and my boss hired a guy last year. First day is orientation, and I let this guy and another that was in orientation to leave early to go to Red Wing and pick up some required and company paid for boots. The guy shows up the next day wearing sneakers. Says he fell asleep and didn't make it to Red Wing. My boss tells him he can't be out in the plant in sneakers. This is 7 a.m., so my boss tells him to go home. And when Red Wing opens at 8:30, get some boots and come back. About noon, he isn't back yet and isn't answering his phone. Boss calls Red Wing and they say he hasn't been there. Boss tells them not give him boots if he shows up. An hour later, he calls my boss saying Red Wing wouldn't give him any boots. When my boss asked him why he didn't go at 8:30, like he was told, he gave the same "I fell asleep" excuse. He was crying about how nobody will give him a chance when my boss told him he wasn't wasting any more time with him. You were given a chance and blew it because you couldn't be bothered to pick up free work boots. Story 19. Archaeologist working on a longhouse site with human remains uncovered and First Nations liaisons present. New girl with no field experience somehow thought she was second in command on site and an osteology expert. Started telling everyone that if they found bones to bring them to her. Someone found raccoon bones, and she started saying they were actually human fetal bones, and that First Nations used to bury babies inside the walls of their longhouses. She was removed from site before lunch. Story 20. Not terribly exciting, but my only one that was one shift and done. Young guy I hired to work in a small retail setting. I trained him, everything seemed promising, and then scheduled him to work with a trusted, reliable employee. After the shift, she told me he hadn't done any actual work the entire shift. He went to his car in the parking lot and in full view of the other employee, thoroughly cleaned it out. Then he came back into the store and took a nap. When I spoke to him about it, he didn't have an explanation. So that was that. Another one that I witnessed, but she lasted a month. Call center, nothing interesting or titillating about our job at all. One day she was walked off the job by multiple bosses in the middle of the day, and that was unusual. One of the bosses later told me it was because they happened to choose to monitor her at that moment, and she was having phone sex with the customer. God, I wanted more details. How in the hell did that even happen? But the boss wouldn't elaborate because she was already not supposed to be telling me about it. Story 21. A little more like a week, but using a press to install a component on a circuit board, was just smashing them. When told he had to go easier so he wouldn't break them, he said, "That's the way I do it." Well, I guess you can go do it your way somewhere else. Story 22. He made it through the workday fine. Then we had a little welcome party for him after work where he proceeded to get completely wasted, walked up to our CEO and started yelling incoherently at him while poking him in the chest with his finger. CEO gently pushed him back, asking him to hit out of his personal space, but drunk Goy staggers backwards until he hit a wall and passed out. He was terminated before he woke up. Story 23. New driver at a trucking company backed a trailer into the terminal manager's new Mercedes on his first and last day. Also, after delivering his last load for the day, but before returning to the yard, a trainee stopped at a truck stop, came out with a case of beer, and tried to get back into the truck with said beer. It's a violation of federal regulations to have alcohol in a commercial vehicle, unless it is the cargo being transported as part of a manifested shipment. So the trainer reported it to management, and he was fired on the spot. Story 24. New security guard fell asleep in various locations around the school throughout his first day. He was fired around 3 p.m. when the principal found him asleep in the front lobby. Eat it. A few people have mentioned that maybe he has narcolepsy, just to correct a misconception the public has about narcolepsy. It is not an excuse to fall asleep all day and then scream discrimination when you get fired. I have narcolepsy. I also get treatment for my narcolepsy and am able to work a full-time job without falling asleep all day. I have also made my disability known to my employer and completed all necessary paperwork to get reasonable accommodations through ADA, so yes, maybe he has narcolepsy, in which case he needs to go see a doctor. Story 25. Okay, not the first day, but we had a new hire pawn his company issued laptop on his first weekend. He came in after the weekend, said he left his laptop at home and asked for another one. He was told that's not how it works and to go home to get the computer. Then he went out into the parking lot, broke one of his windows, and came right back in saying the laptop was stolen out of his car. Like, dude, your car was parked literally directly in front of the manager's office window. He tried to get me to back up his story, which, A, I didn't even know the guy, but also, B, the person you want me to lie to watched you break your own window. Story 26. He was training in a warehouse and was near a bunch of bubble wrap. He popped a bunch of dick shapes into the bubble wrap. When the supervisor came back, it was a really disappointing conversation, and he was walked out. Story 27. She took a phone call while on the floor and continued the phone call for an hour while still working. We were kind of dumbfounded because she helped customers and kept working and would say, "Oh, hold on," to her phone conversation to do so. But we can't have someone do that, so she had to go. Was a good folder of shirts, though. Story 28. Pretended he didn't have 2 hit-and-run accidents in the employee parking lot by claiming he didn't even own a car. He called a friend and planned to sneak his car keys out to the friend so it could be driven down the street for him to get to later. He apparently aroused suspicion that he was up to something when he asked a few of his new coworkers if there was an exit to the building that couldn't be observed from the security desk. Story 29. A while ago now, 20 years-ish, the person who showed up for work was absolutely not the person who was interviewed. Heard a couple different stories for what had happened. Either they sent someone else to interview for them, or someone stood in their place because they went AWOL, but both to me are far-fetched. Never got to the bottom of it, and wasn't high enough in the company to learn what happened, but it was definitely weird. Story 30. I worked in a small chain retail pharmacy in high school in the 90s. Kid from another school got hired and spent the first 3 hours of his shift telling literally anyone that would listen. He didn't need the job, and only got it to steal cologne and cigarettes. We were a pretty tight-knit group, and this kid was an asshole, so someone told the manager, who performed a random bag check on all of us at closing time. He found 6 bottles of Fahrenheit and 3 cartons of Parliaments in his backpack. He was fired on the spot. Best part is his mom came in the next day screaming at the manager because the kid told her he got fired because the manager told him he didn't like Indians. Story 31. Young lad started in a junior marketing role in the office as part of my team. He was sat at a desk directly in front of the IT department, who had a clear view of his monitor. Within 30 minutes of his induction, one of the IT guys calls me over and says, "Look at this!" New lad had opened File Explorer and was trying to root around the contents of shared drives and servers on the company network. We pulled him to one side and asked him what he thought he was doing, warned him that trying to pry around the systems on your first day was probably not the ideal start. He apologized and promised not to do it again. After he left the room, IT guy and I went back to IT guy's desk and, I shit you not, in front of our very eyes, this lad immediately opened the registry and started trying to access security settings. 2 minutes between first warning and firing. Edit. It is seldom a good idea to engage with the well-actually reply guys, but I'm going to clear up a few things in the hope they might stop replying. I was not the IT guy. The IT guy was the IT guy. Damn fucking right I don't know shit about security, systems, access rights. Did the new lad actually access anything as opposed to simply try to? Fucked if I know. See above. Yes, it probably was a terrible system setup. This was over 20 years ago. It was the worst environment I ever worked in. Nothing was done properly. Nothing worked. I didn't stay long. Maybe the IT guy should have been fired for this too. It might well have been a failing on his part. I don't know. I was not the IT, etc. Should the new lad have been fired at all? You'd need to ask the HR manager that fired him based on what the IT guy reported. I was there in my capacity as the new lad's supervisor to witness the firing.